Hey everyone, my name's Christian. Welcome to Blackhawk Student Ministries. Thanks for being here. So, there's this line in our weekly liturgy. It says, "We pursue the good life, fueled by the Holy Spirit." And this line brings up some questions, like, who is the Holy Spirit? And what exactly does he do? So for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about the Holy Spirit. And so we want to start with those two questions. Who is the Holy Spirit and what does he do? First, let me start by asking you a question. What comes to mind when you think about God? Maybe you picture some old guy in white robes, or maybe you've seen paintings of Jesus and that's what you think of. Well, humans spend a lot of time thinking about and trying to describe who God is and what he does in the world. But honestly, even our best depictions fall terribly short. For many of us, when we think of God, we imagine him as being far away and disconnected from our lives. He exists out there somewhere. But what we see in the Bible is the opposite. God is close to his people, and he is always moving closer, pursuing deeper and more personal relationships with humans. In fact, the Bible tells us that God is even with us in this very moment. He's present with each of us through the Holy Spirit. Now, maybe you haven't heard much about the Holy Spirit. One of the first times I remember hearing about God's Spirit was at the end of prayers, like, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The church refers to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as the Trinity. There is one God who exists in community as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. One God, three people. This is beyond what our human minds can understand or imagine. It's impossible to wrap our brains around, but the Trinity reveals some aspects of God that are important for us to try to understand, challenging as it may be. So the Holy Spirit isn't some vague supernatural force. He's not what people might describe as the universe or energy. The Holy Spirit is a person. And I love the different words that the Bible uses to describe him, like comforter, helper, advocate, guide, the spirit of wisdom, the gift of God, and the spirit of Jesus. These create a really cool picture about who the Holy Spirit is, and it's still just barely scratching the surface. Okay, so we've talked a bit about who the Holy Spirit is, but what does he do? There are a few ways that the Holy Spirit interacts in our lives today. One thing the Holy Spirit does is give us gifts to serve. In 1 Corinthians 12, Paul talks about how God gives us what's called spiritual gifts. He says there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. And he's talking about the Holy Spirit. We all have different kinds of gifts, talents and special skills, things that God gives us to use for the sake of others. Just about anything that you are particularly good at or that comes to you naturally, that could be a spiritual gift that God has given you to use in service of others. The Holy Spirit also helps us grow fruit in our lives. Galatians 5 lists the fruits of the Spirit as love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These are good fruits, characteristics that I want my life to produce. But the thing is, my life doesn't always produce these fruits. It also produces some pretty rotten fruit. Which brings us to the other way the Holy Spirit works in our lives today. He helps us break free from the destructive patterns in our life, the stuff that we might consider rotten fruit. Because we're people living in a broken world, we all have different bad habits and negative traits that come out in our lives. But God's Spirit gives us the freedom from these negative patterns and grows in us the desire and the ability to produce better fruit. Before I started following Jesus, some people in my life described me as stubborn and impatient. I thought things should always go a certain way and people should just do it that way, and by that way, I meant my way. I spent a lot of time worrying about things and holding on to anger and frustration, even long after the incident that upset me. These things not only negatively impacted my relationships with others, it also hurt me in a number of ways. I wasn't the kind of person that I wanted to be. I was rigid and unforgiving. I was producing rotten fruit. But as I started following Jesus, the Holy Spirit started producing a different kind of fruit in my life. I started to become a person who was known for patience, peace, joy, gentleness. And as my life started to produce this new kind of fruit, the other fruit started showing up less and less. It wasn't an overnight change. Like fruit growing on a tree, it's a process that takes time. As we spend time with God, He works in our life to produce good fruit, the kind that's good for us and for those around us. So the Holy Spirit gives us gifts to serve, helps us become more like Him by bearing good fruit, and helps us break free from patterns that produce bad fruit in our lives. In a word, the Holy Spirit transforms us. He helps us change from the inside out and become the kind of people that God made us to be. And because of the Holy Spirit, we are never alone. In good times, in hard times, when we struggle, and when we succeed, whatever we do, we are never alone because God's Spirit is with us. Learning about all the ways God's Spirit is working in the world today makes me want to know Him more and spend time letting Him bring out the best fruit in me. So here's a question to discuss with your neighbor. What's your favorite fruit?